everyone, it's Hailey, and today I'm going to be talking about 6 more books that I have read recently. So you guys know the drill by now. Pretty much every time that I read 6 books, I talk about them in a spoiler-free little mini review format. So if there are any books that you see here in particular that you would like to hear about, there will be timestamps in the description box down below for you guys, but let's just dive into it. So I am going to try and be a little more quick and concise about these because I feel like I always think that these videos are going to be shorter than they end up being because I just end up going like on and on and on like I am right now. So I'm going to try and get quick and to the point so you guys can hear more thoughts about these books. But I did want to mention once again that I don't rate books anymore. I don't find that it was something that was productive for me. I found it really limiting, so I just talk about my thoughts and that's just easier for me. So that being said, the first book that I wanted to talk about today is Tales from the Hinterland by Melissa Albert. So this is a collection of fairy tales from the world of the Hazelwood books, and this is actually like the basis of that story. So if you aren't familiar with it, the Hazelwood is this like creepy fairy tale-esque story, and it's perfect for fall, perfect for a rainy day, but it is based around the main character's grandmother has this book of fairy tales that she wrote, Tales from the Hinterland, that is super popular, has like this really weird like cult following, and everyone who loves it is super dedicated to it. So this is actually the book that like she wrote. This is the book of fairy tales. So it has illustrations in it as well, and it is like just as creepy as you would be expecting it to be. Now, I will say there's a couple of stories in here that are like really prevalent to the original book. Like there's an Alice story and then Catherine, I think it is, and I found those ones to be kind of underwhelming. Now, I love when you have like an original story and then there's a book of fairy tales or something like that to add to the world. It's my favorite thing, and I do think this one did a good job of it, but it definitely wasn't my favorite. The main issue that I had with this was it got to be very, very repetitive. All of the fairy tales kind of had a similar structure and a similar story. Like they're kind of feminist fairy tales, so it really was just kind of the same thing over and over again with different character names and different circumstances. So that got to be kind of disappointing because it got old really quickly, that it was like pretty much the exact same setup all the time. They all followed the same basic structure of a female protagonist that was being oppressed mostly by males, sometimes by society, and then like overcame that in a dark and creepy way and broke free of that, but also like not really, because it was more of like a not happy ending. So I liked the fact that there weren't happy endings, and I didn't mind that. It's just the fact that all of the tales were like so similar that really got to me after a while, because I did appreciate that they were like feminist fairy tales. That was really interesting, but it was just so repetitive. I do think that this is worth reading if you enjoyed the Hazelwood. I think it pairs really nicely with it. It's dark and creepy, just as you would expect, and it is like, it's nice to see the rest of the stories get told. It just, like I said, was repetitive, and that is like my main critique and issue with it. I think if it hadn't been and there was more variety, I would have enjoyed it a lot more. Melissa Albert's writing style does suit this kind of story really well. It's dark, sinister, all of that, and I think if you're into that, you would definitely enjoy it. But I think if you haven't read the Hazelwood, this probably wouldn't be worth the read. Like the fairy tales weren't bad, it's just I could predict what was going to happen from like the very first sentence, because like after a while, after reading so many of them, I knew what was going to happen because they all had kind of the same layout. So do with that what you will, but like I said, I think if you have read the Hazelwood, you probably would like it. Like I liked it. It just, I do have a few issues. Particularly, I enjoyed The Skinned Maiden. I thought that one was like really creepy. And The Door That Wasn't There was like extra unsettling to me because all I could think of the entire time was Coraline, which you guys know how I feel about that if you've been watching my videos for like basically since October, since I read that book. So that I did not like it, but I thought that The Clockwork Bride was also a really interesting one. It was kind of like a dark and twisted version of The Nutcracker almost, which was interesting. So yeah, that is that. Okay, so next I have a book that unfortunately did not work out for me, and I have kind of mentioned this one a couple of times since I tried to read it, but that is Lost in the Neverwoods by Aiden Thomas. So this is the latest release by the author of Cemetery Boys, which was one of my favorite books of the year last year, and I was so excited for this one. It is an urban Peter Pan retelling, and the cover is beautiful. Like, it just sounded like a recipe for success, but I ended up getting 40% of the way through and I ended up DNFing it, and DNF did not finish, but I so badly wanted to see it through, but I got to the point where like I just didn't want to pick it up. I didn't want to read, so I didn't want to put myself into a slump because of one book. So I will read more that this author comes out with. I think they are really talented, but this one just didn't do it for me. I have heard from a couple people that like there is a twist in the end that makes the journey worth it, but I was just so bored, honestly. Like, nothing was really happening, and for me, if nothing is happening and you're like 50% of the way through a book, that just doesn't work for me. That's just personal preference. Like, I need a little bit of something by that point, and I just didn't feel like I got that. So essentially the premise for this is that you have Wendy, and Wendy and her brothers went missing years ago, and her brothers never returned, but she did, and she didn't remember like anything that happened. So now it's years later and kids have started to go missing again. So people are asking Wendy questions, understandably, and she has no answers. Like, she has no clue. So she ends up being contacted by Peter, who is looking for her help. So you can see how there's like the modern Peter Pan retelling business there. But I don't think this is a bad book by any means. I think if you don't mind slower reads and you don't mind it taking a little while to get to the payoff, you will enjoy this. But just for me, that's not something that I like. I felt like by the point that I got to, which was like 40%, I didn't know much about the characters at all. I didn't really know where the plot was going. I was just kind of confused and didn't really like understand fully what was going on because not a lot had really happened. So because things hadn't really gone anywhere and it didn't really seem like they were going anywhere, I was like, not really into it. Also, I felt like Wendy and Peter were really one-dimensional characters. I didn't feel like they were developed much, and I think maybe if their characterization had been a little bit stronger, I would have been able to see it through. Basically, I needed like either some characterization happening or I needed some plot happening, but I felt like neither were happening, and it didn't really seem like anything was going to happen soon, and that just, I don't know. I needed something, and I felt like I just got nothing, which was so disappointing to me. I'm sure the story does end up coming together, but it just, once again, it was really repetitive. It just kind of seemed like the same thing where Wendy was like, I don't know what's happening. Like, this is what I remember. And like, why is Peter contacting me? Who is Peter? It was just a lot of questions and not really a lot of answers. So it was hard for the plot to move forward or the characters to move forward. So basically, that's just my thoughts on what I did end up reading. I feel like it probably did get better, but I just didn't feel the need to see it through. But like I said, I will be reading more from this author for sure because I loved Cemetery Boys so much. This one just didn't, like, it just kind of missed the mark for me. But if you don't mind slower reads and kind of go into it knowing that, you might end up liking it. Next up, I ended up reading I Love You So Mochi by Sarah Kuhn. So I talked about this book recently because I picked it up in the little on like come book shopping with me online video that I did. I'll have that link down below in case you missed it, but I'm so glad that I picked this book up because it was adorable and it was perfect for spring because it's set during spring break, so that is perfect. But I didn't realize that it's actually set in Kyoto, Japan, and you get to follow this character who's going there. She's learning more about herself. She has like this kind of insta-lovey romance, but in this case, I didn't really mind it. It was just like a nice escape for a read. So the main character that you're following is Kimmy, and she ends up getting into a fight with her parents because her parents, I mean, mostly her mother, they want her to be an artist, and she has been struggling with art. She's been struggling with inspiration and doesn't feel like that's what she actually wants to do. So she ends up taking spring break to go to Kyoto to meet with her grandparents for the first time and get to know them a little bit better. And there she discovers a passion for fashion, and just like she has such a journey, and it is so adorable. So early on in her trip, she meets Akira, who is dressed up as a Mochi mascot for his family's Mochi stand, and it, like, oh my gosh, they have this instant connection. They end up having this instant romance that is really cute and a pleasure to follow. Like I said, definitely insta love there, but didn't really mind it so much in this instance. But one of my favorite things was watching Kimmy develop on her own, and also her relationship blossom with her grandmother and her grandfather, but particularly with her grandmother. It was really nice to see them like have this relationship, even though her mother is estranged from her grandmother, so she never really got to know her, but now she's getting to know her more. She's getting to know more of her culture and more about fashion, and how like that's actually an option for a career. It doesn't have to just be a hobby. It's something that she can actually do for the rest of her life. So it was really nice to follow her coming of age story. Japan provided such a beautiful backdrop for it. Like, I felt completely transported there, and it was just lovely. If you're looking for a book that deals with like the pressures of expectations from others and trying to find yourself on this journey of self-discovery, dealing with all those outside pressures, I think this is a great one to go with. But it also is just a cute, quick, and fluffy contemporary read. So it's really great for the coming, like, you know, spring and summer. I think this is a great one to try and pick up. So after that, I ended up picking up The How and the Why by Cynthia Hand. I had wanted to pick up this book for so long, and it took me forever to actually end up picking it up, but I'm glad that I did end up finally reading it. So I have read a few Cynthia Hand books before, but this one is kind of different. It's more like The Last Time We Say Goodbye by her, or The Last Time We Said Goodbye. I can't remember what the tense of that is, but it's more of an emotional contemporary, and I really enjoyed The Last Time We Said Goodbye. So I had a high expectations for this one, and I did end up really enjoying it. So you follow the main character, who she is adopted, and she decides that she wants to learn a little bit more about her birth mother. So this is told alternating between her and like learning more about her birth mother, and also just like going through life and all of that. And then it's also told in letters from her birth mother at the time that she is pregnant with the main character. So there was a lot going on in this story, to be honest, but I felt like it did all come together really well. The end was kind of a little bit like there was a lot. It was kind of rushed, but I did think, like, I wasn't sure what the plot line was going to be for the like modern day, if you will, from the actual main character, not from her birth mother, but I felt like I liked where that plot line went. It wasn't what I was expecting, but it was different. One of the things that this book does really well is it manages to be very hard-hitting, but also really like lighthearted and fun all at once, and that like simultaneous emotion there made it a really great read, because you had more deep things going on, but also like it was light and fluffy, and I wasn't really expecting that. I loved the relationship that the main character had with her family. I thought it was so lovely, and I really felt for her because her mother is dying, and she's dealing with that while she's trying to find out more about her birth mother. And there was just like, she had a lot going on, and sometimes she made some decisions that I didn't necessarily agree with at all and did not like. So she wasn't like the most likable character at times, but I did feel like she was realistic. I don't think like some of the things that she did could be excused, but you know, they happened, and yeah, you can't, like, I don't 100% like the main character, but I did find her story interesting. That being said, I would have liked to hear more from her best friend. I found her best friend to be a really interesting character, and I like the fact that her best friend was also adopted, and there was kind of the contrast there between their two, like, adoption stories. But they also had a really powerful bond, even though, you know, there were some choices made by our main character that I hated. That being said, the main character did have a really great support system behind her, and it was nice to see like how they rallied behind her the entire story. She's really into Broadway and musicals and stuff, and that was really fun. Like, there's a musical that's going on in this story, so that was cool. There were just a lot of plot lines, but I liked how it came together. I did like the second half more than the first, because I felt like the first and kind of the middle like dragged its feet a little bit before it got going. I felt like the letters from the birth mother really rounded out the story. It was nice to hear her story, and I enjoyed the ending to an extent. I could have done without the epilogue, because I felt like it kind of like, I don't know, it was a bit over the top for me and ruined it a little bit. So I liked how it ended in the like core story, if you will. The epilogue I could have done without. It wasn't like, it didn't ruin it for me completely, but it was kind of like, oh, like, okay, like I don't really know how to describe my feelings toward that. I just didn't feel like it was entirely necessary. I felt like we had the closure already, and that just kind of like wasn't needed. That is just like a minor detail. Like I just felt like it kind of wrapped things up a little bit too perfectly, but there was a lot tackled in this story, and I think all of it was done really well, and it was really enjoyable. So definitely enjoyed this one, and we'll read more from this author soon. So next up, I ended up picking up another book that I got in that little book haul, like come book shopping with me video that I did, and that is Saving Savannah by Tanya Bolden. For some reason, every time I want to say Saving Savannah, I think it's because I'm ready to say Tanya, but it always just throws me off. But that is completely besides the point. So I have really mixed feelings on this book. I think it's a very important read. I think you will learn a lot, but it doesn't have a lot of plot. It doesn't have a lot of characterization. And I know when I was talking about Lost in the Neverwoods, I was like, meh about that. But in this instance, you are learning a lot about history. So that's why I'm kind of okay with it. So this deals with race relations in the US. Particularly, this is set in Washington, D.C. after, like shortly after World War I. So you're following a family, a Black family that is well off. They are in higher society, and you are following the main character, Savannah, and all of the things that she faces. But there's also, this is at the time of the Red Summer, which is something that I had never heard about, but this taught me so much about it. So it was a terrible time where white supremacist terrorist groups just absolutely ran rampant and were going on killing sprees in multiple cities in the United States, which is very hard to read because of that. And it was really horrible to see like what these characters were facing and all that was happening at the time. You actually got to hear from a lot of different historical figures, which was really interesting. And there's also a pretty extensive author's note at the end that will teach you a lot more actual like factual information about those historical figures, but also about the time period and what Black people were facing at that time. So I learned so much reading it, but there's like, if you're waiting for a plot, you're not really gonna get one. There is not much of a plot for this story at all. So it was really different in that way. I did find the writing style to be pretty jarring because like it just kind of, it's really hard to describe. It was really unique. Like you never really got to know about the character before. It was just kind of going through the events. It really is a story that is going to completely tell you what's happening rather than show you. So you know how like you kind of always hear, or probably always hear, showing versus telling. This is totally a story that like relies heavily on telling rather than showing, which is usually kind of a no-no. And I didn't necessarily like hate it, but it was definitely different. This story taught me a lot and it exposed me to a lot, and I'm very grateful for that. I just kind of wish that there had been more going on in the way of storytelling. I feel like it could have been a nonfiction story, and maybe then it would have even had like more of a story element. I felt like the fact that it was fictionalized, it didn't really read like that because there was like so much information. It read more factual and more like a textbook, but I think it is super informative, really important, and it's so nice to see that there are more like POC leads coming out in YA historical fiction, because that is like one of the whitest genres, honestly. Like there are not many for young adult historical fictions that don't have a white main character, don't focus on Western society. It's really hard to find. So it's really nice that those stories are starting to be told, and I hope that that will continue like going that way and that there will be a lot more. So I think that this is worth the read just for what it will teach you. I think if you know that you're not going to get much of a plot line going into it, you might have a little bit better luck. But I think this is a book that has more of an acquired taste just because of the method of writing and the fact that there's not much of a plot or much information given about the characters. Okay, and finally, from there, I don't know why I decided to read this book after reading that one, which like kind of, I guess I did read it quickly, but it felt like one of those slower reads. But from there, I decided to finally freaking pick up Crescent City by Sarah J. Maas. Actually, it's House of Earth and Blood, but I always say Crescent City just because, I don't know, that's what I say. But this is the first book to the Crescent City series, and this is also Sarah J. Maas's first official adult fantasy, because all of her other books have been categorized as YA, but this is like the first official adult one. Even though there are definitely some others that should also be adult, it's whatever. Also, I will just say now, since we're on the topic, I felt like some of her YA ones read as more adult than this one, like in terms of the content, but I digress. So this story deals with angels and demons. It's like a world, it's a high fantasy, but it's kind of like a world that resembles our own, but not. Like these characters, or these creatures rather, coexist with humans, and there's fae in here, there's werewolves, there's like vampires, there's a little bit of everything, to be honest. And I had heard some really great things about this book. I had heard from a lot of people that they think that it is Sarah J. Maas's best ever, but I disagree. I didn't like this one as much as I have enjoyed her other books. Now, I haven't read her books in a really long time. Like the last one that I read, I think it was either Tower of Dawn or like the teeny tiny Court of whatever book that she came out with. I haven't read the new one yet. Where is it? I haven't read A Court of Silver Flames yet because I wanted to start with this one. I still haven't even finished Throne of Glass, to be honest. So I'm really far behind, but I was like, I will read this one because it's like a new world and everything, so I don't feel like I have to get caught up with the series. So I went into it like, I don't know, I knew it was going to take me a while to read. It actually didn't take as long as I was expecting, but that is because I was alternating between the audiobook and physically reading it. For me, that's the way to read like these big chunky fantasies like that, because if I'm just physically reading it, it's going to take me so much longer, and I will get very discouraged. So for me, that's the way that I do it. And I felt like with this one, like I knew it was going to be slow going into the beginning, especially. A lot of people had said there's a lot of info dumping, and the slowness lasted way too long. It took so long for anything to really happen, and I get so frustrated, and this is kind of like a mini rant. I also said this in my Goodreads review, but like I get so annoyed when I'm reading a freaking like 800-page book and I'm like, whatever, I'm 600 pages into it, whatever. And someone is like, I mean, so many people were like, oh, in the end, it's worth it, don't worry. But like, no, I don't want to be trudging through 600 pages just to get to the story and to get to the meat of things and for it to be like, oh yeah, that was worth it. And honestly, it wasn't worth it. It wasn't bad, but this book was way too long. Like her books, I feel like she has a tendency to kind of drag her feet around the story, and all of her characters also like read pretty similarly. So like the main characters particularly, they all can kind of like blend together. And I do want to say, I didn't hate this book. I didn't not like it, but it's not my favorite by her. I thought it was good, and I will probably, because the ending was interesting, I will probably read the next one. But like, I just don't think that you should have to like, so many people were like, oh, the last 250 pages are great. Okay, so then why isn't this like a 300-page book, or like even a 400, 500-page book? Why is it 800 pages if I have to wait until the last 250 pages for it to get good? Anyways, yeah. So basically, there just wasn't a lot happening like in the beginning. There was like build up for things, but I would have been okay if there was more happening, like a romance plotline, but even that I felt like took a really long time to actually get going or even like start. I know I'm like yelling right now like I hated this book, but I do want to say I didn't hate it. It's just like, I just get so frustrated when there are these giant books that, one, it takes me, I'm not a fan of big books. I get bored, so I'd rather have like a smaller book. I'm not really a huge fan of series. That's just my personal preference. So when you have a book that is this dang big and I have to wait until the end for it to like get going and get good, I'm not happy. That being said, in the end, like it did get interesting. I still don't think it was worth that long going through it, but like there were a lot of twists and turns, but they all happened so close together. And like, I felt like it just could have been spread out more. it could have been better because it could have been spread out more. I don't know. A lot of this definitely comes down to personal preference, but like a lot of, I mean, reviews really do. Like my opinion isn't gonna be the same as yours. So if you do think this is her best book, that's awesome. It just wasn't my favorite. The world was really interesting. I liked how it was this like modern-ish urban setting with all these creatures. That was cool. The creatures were also very interesting. There was a lot of build up to the world, so it took me a long time to kind of like understand what was happening because there was so much and it was a lot to wrap my head around. I did like the main character. Like I said, she could kind of be like the other two main characters that Sarah J. Maas has written before. That's not like, that doesn't mean that I don't like it. Like, she has a formula that works, but I definitely like can see the similarities between her main characters. I feel like she writes like the tough outside but soft inside girls like all the time, and like, yeah, it's just, I like it, but yeah, that definitely is what she sticks with. But I don't know, I just got frustrated with this one because there was like this supposedly urgent plot and it dragged out so much for something that was supposed to be so urgent, and I didn't feel like the romance was like my favorite. And I did like the love interest, but like I don't know, I didn't really love him, and I was just frustrated obviously with how long it took to get going. But I will probably read the sequel. It's just, if I hadn't been like listening to part of this on audio, I probably would have DNF'd it just out of mere frustration. But since I was listening to part of it on audio, it did make it like go a little bit faster, which made me a lot less frustrated. But that is how I feel about this. Once again, I didn't hate it. It's just mixed feelings, you know? Okay, so I felt like that was kind of quicker than I usually go, but I mean, when I go to upload the footage, it's probably going to be even longer than usual. But I hope you guys enjoyed. Those are the books that I read recently. If you have also read any of these, please let me know your thoughts on them. Remember, we all have our own opinion, and that's totally fine. I love when you guys hate my favorite books. Like, I don't mind at all. I like hearing different opinions. That is the beautiful thing about books. Not everyone reads the same book all the time. So that is going to be all for today's video. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next one soon. Bye!